Russia regards migration as something it can weaponize and basically use human lives as part of its military objectives.
A newly leaked video from the Russian front line shows a Russian officer threatening to kill his own soldiers if they don't obey his commands. It's the first-hand illustration of the brutality inside Putin's army. And meanwhile, the Ukrainian army has found a new use for drones, persuading Russian soldiers to surrender. Now let's talk first of all then to Tim Ripley, who's the author and editor of Defence Eye. Hello to you, Tim.
Evening.
Hi, starting then with that story out of Russia. Russian commanders then killing their own men, and that's sometimes apparently because they won't pay bribes to their superiors, as well as they won't obey orders. Were you as shocked and surprised by this account as when I was?
Well, not really. It's the Russian way of war. I mean, the Russian army is notoriously brutal to its soldiers. I mean, going back to the time of the Tsar or Joseph Stalin in World War II, or even in Soviet times in Afghanistan, being in the Russian army is not fun. It is a brutal and desperate experience for anybody who has to serve in it. That's why a lot of Russians don't want to serve in the Russian army. But that doesn't mean it's not an effective fighting force. And time after time and again, these brutal methods are effective at driving soldiers into battle.
Yeah, I mean, the brutality of the Russian forces is well known and very well documented. This element, though, of gangsterism, officers demanding kickbacks, demanding, wads of money, and if they don't get it, then a soldier can end up murdered. It's another dimension. Or to you, as someone who studies the subject, is that also a familiar feature of a country which is, after all, well known for its corruption?
I mean, this is just, the way it is in the Russian military, the Russian state. Most Russian companies or most Russian industrial enterprises or state organizations, this type of corruption is endemic in them.
Okay, let's talk about the Ukrainian side of the story at the front line, and the way drones are being used, not simply to find and to kill the enemy, but to force them to surrender. Tell us more about that, because it is a particularly sophisticated use of this technology.
It is another part of the Ukrainian drive to try and show that they are one of the most sophisticated operators of drones. It is one of the few good news stories that comes out of their war effort at the moment. And they want to, contrast themselves to the Russians, who are notoriously brutal and have this notorious reputation. And they want to portray themselves as being, considerate and helping and trying to humane fighters in the conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading these accounts. There's a piece in the Times, a really good piece in the Times now, about drones appearing overhead to Russian soldiers in the field. The soldiers look up, they jump, there's no escape, or maybe they just want to get away from the front line, and the drone will then guide them to where they can be picked up and taken by Ukrainian soldiers.
I mean, you have to try and put these things in perspective, because most of the drone operations by the Ukrainians and the Russians are not of this nature. They are very deadly, and
Yes.
they are aimed at killing people. And only a fraction of drone activity involves this kind of thing. I mean, both sides are using drones aggressively to try and dominate the battlefield. And we're seeing this right now. At the moment, there's this big battle taking place around this town of Provosk in Donetsk, where the Russians appear to have it surrounded and are using the drones to complete the encirclement by attacking any vehicles or groups of soldiers that try to break the encirclement, rather than physically putting their troops on the ground. It's sort of being besieged from the air, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, you have to sort of take these little vignettes, which are quite interesting in themselves.
Yeah.
But we are in the middle of a brutal war, which is coming to a sort of denouement in this big battle at the moment, which is playing out as we speak, with tens of thousands of soldiers fighting each other, dozens of drones going up every hour. So, yes, these little vignettes are quite interesting, but they're not the main event in this war, which is very, very brutal. And the vast majority of these drones are used for offensive, aggressive action that results in people being killed.
It's such an important point. Tim Ripley, the author and editor of Defence Eye, thank you. Now, staying with Russia, there's a new report discussing Russia using migration as a weapon against Europe. The research is by the British think tank, the Henry Jackson Society, and it discusses irregular migration along Europe's eastern borders surging by around 200% since the start of this war. Michael McManus is Director of Research at the Henry Jackson Society. Hello to you, Michael.
Hello, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. Michael, tell us more then about the use of human migration by Russia as a weapon.
Well, in essence, what Russia is doing is they view migration as a means to place pressure on NATO and the European Union. What they do is they facilitate migration from places like Africa, the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent. They then take these migrants close to the border between Russia and NATO, and they send the migrants on their way in the belief that this will create chaos along the border, it will create social cohesion problems at home, and it will serve Russia's strategic aims. We know, for example, Russia's happy to work with smuggling gangs. The Times broke the story about the Bulgarian gang, for example. So we know that Russia regards migration as something it can weaponize and basically use human lives as part of its military objectives.
And where is this happening, Michael? And how is it being managed? Are we seeing migrants being bussed to the border, literally, and then just let free across the line?
Well, it's being managed at the highest level. Visa laws for entry into Ukraine and Russia have been relaxed by the authorities there to try and facilitate this immigration, sometimes through the official state travel agency of Belarus. They're then taken to the border, literally, as you said, they're literally taken to the border, sometimes by buses and cars. And they're then told, if you go to Poland or if you go to Estonia, if you go to Lithuania, you can get into Europe and then it will be a Shangri-La. But of course, that's not the case. And again, this very callous attitude to the migrants is something that we shouldn't really be surprised with because, of course, Vladimir Putin's cavalier attitude to human life is something that needs no introduction.
I mean, you found that the use of this tactic increases when Russia's under particular pressure, maybe on the battlefield or maybe economically due to sanctions, which is interesting in itself. Why is it not happening all the time? Because it would continue to exert pressure against an adversary from Russia's point of view.
Well, that's a very good point. Our study, we believe, is the first of its kind to look at instrumentalized migration as part of a tactic in an ongoing war. The reason it doesn't happen all the time is because Russia doesn't feel it needs to use it. We found the data showed very clearly. Whenever Russian battlefield deaths go up significantly, obviously they're on the back foot. That's when you see the migrants showing up at the border. But when things improve for Russia, the migrant numbers go down, which again suggests what we already suspect, which is that they have their hands on the tap. And it doesn't happen all the time because when their conventional forces are doing well, they don't feel they need to resort to this grey zone hybrid tactic of instrumentalized migration.
Is it possible, Michael, to gauge the impacts of this on this country, on UK?
I think it's definitely having an impact on the UK because we know that some of the migrants who enter Europe's borders via the east don't intend to stay there. The Eastern Europeans have a lot of respect, I have a lot of love and affection for them, are not as desirable to live in as parts of Western Europe. So I think it is having an impact. We know that Russian activities, not just in Ukraine, but the Wagner Group and Africa Corps in Africa are driving migrants up through the Sahel, through the Coup Belt, across the Med into France, and then ultimately into the UK. So Russia has every incentive to say that they can use migration as a weapon, be that against NATO's eastern borders to test our resolve, or getting migrants deeper into Europe itself to try and create social cohesion problems and also inflame a very sensitive debate in a way that perhaps we could do without Russia's involvement in.
Yeah, and you do have ideas on what might be done about this.
Yeah, I think that what we definitely need to do is we obviously need the physical borders, but what we need to do is have better open source intelligence, because from what we could gather, when Russian battlefield deaths go up, that's when you start to see the migration. Now, the problem is that Russia is not very forthcoming about that data. So we need to be able to be sure that the EU border agency, Frontex, NATO, and the EU, and of course the member states, say, okay, here's what the intelligence is telling us about Russia's battlefield situation. In light of that, we can expect a surge. And I think that's one thing we definitely need.
All right, Michael McManus at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you.